Okay, it looks like it's about noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer Cook. I'm the Small Acreage Management Coordinator for the Front Range in Colorado. This webinar is made possible by the Natural Resources Conservation Service and Colorado State University Extension. Today we have Ryan Ludlow with us. He's going to be presenting the first part of our Firewise Landscaping webinar series. He's going to talk about home ignition zone today. And then tune in next Thursday, the August 15th, for Irene's presentation on fire-resistant plants. A few things before we get started. If you're new to webinars, check out the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. That's the chat box. So that's the box you can use to type in any questions or comments throughout the presentation. And I'm sure Ryan, at the end of his presentation, will have time for question and answer. And then one final thing, this webinar and next week's webinar are approved for 1 CEU credit from the Society of American Foresters. So if you're interested in receiving that credit, I just need to make sure that you're participating in this live webinar. I've had about 5 or 6 people email me, so just if you know you've emailed me or if you want the credit, just type your full name in the chat box just so I can keep track of that throughout the presentation and make sure you get your credit. So I think without further ado, I'll pass things over to Ryan Ludlow. He's the Boulder County Forestry Education and Outreach Coordinator, and I'm excited to hear what he has to talk about. So Ryan, I'm going to turn my mic off and hand things over to you.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. This is my first webcam or webinar here today, so hopefully everything works smoothly. But obviously, everyone who's listening from home or at your office, we're going to be talking about defensible space and wildfire mitigation today, with a special emphasis on defensible space, not necessarily meaning moonscape. So I'm going to click through, and I've got a lot of slides here with a lot of photos. And also, we're hoping to have some videos, and we'll see if those are able to work for everyone. Otherwise, I will kind of describe what the videos are supposed to show. So I'll get into things here and kind of go through. And what I'm really going to be setting up is how can individual landowners create effective wildfire mitigation around their property. So, and if we can, as we're going through, I'm going to have folks hold their questions until the end, just since I do have a lot to run through. I'm hoping that we can get through everything. I'm trying to squeeze about 2 hours worth of information into one, so you guys will see how I'm able to do here. So as far as today, what I'm going to really be focusing on, just a quick kind of overview of what to expect. I'm going to start off by talking about lessons learned from past fires here in Colorado and kind of what these past fires have really told us about how to create effective mitigation on your property. I'm then going to go on and talk about embers and being ember aware. From there, I'll focus on kind of how we can incorporate patio design in layout into our defensible space. I'll also talk on plant placement, where we should put plants, where we shouldn't put plants. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about defensible space. So the tree cutting, what type of thinning we should be doing on our property. So as you'll see, I'm going to focus a lot of our time on the first 4 bullets and then a little bit less time on actually defensible space, which you'll see in past trainings you may have attended where we really were focused very heavily on defensible space, and I think a little less on lessons learned from past fires. So to begin with, I wanted to kind of point out that all of the information I'm bringing you is based on current research, and I think we've gotten a lot of really new research from past fires. So recent fires that have occurred, like the Fourmile Canyon fire that occurred in Boulder County in September of 2010, we had a report come out after that fire. More recently, the Waldo Canyon fire that occurred last summer outside of Colorado Springs, the report that I have featured on the left here was coming right out of that fire. So the point here is that we have a lot of these lessons learned from these past fires. Also, the 2011 fire season in Texas was a very destructive fire season. They lost about 1,600 homes and produced a report that you see there after that fire. We also have a lot of research going on across the country. The University of California, specifically a researcher, Dr. Steve Quarles, is doing a lot of research for us. We also have the IBHS research station, which I'm going to talk on a little bit more, where they actually have built an ember blizzard blowing machine, and they've been studying building materials and how to make sure that we're retrofitting our existing homes to be more fire resistant. So all of these reports that I just highlighted, what the real takeaway is that all of these reports are telling us the same thing. So if you go all the way back in Colorado history to 1989, when the Black Tiger fire occurred in Boulder County, after that fire, they wrote a report, and the findings of that report were actually very similar to the findings of the recent reports that we have coming out. What it tells us is that proactive wildfire mitigation is effective. It tells us that we, as landowners, can dramatically improve the chances of our home surviving the next fire. And that survival has everything to do with what you have done, the homeowner, before that fire occurs. And what these reports continually point out is that it's your personal responsibility to protect your property. So what you have done before that next fire occurs will have everything to do with whether or not your home survives that next fire. The other interesting piece is that all these reports continually point out that where we need to do this fuel modification falls within a relatively short distance of only about 100 to 200 feet from your home. In the last, and I think this is a piece that we haven't focused on enough in the past, is that we really need to make sure that we're maintaining our defensible space. So as landowners, we not only need to create effective defensible space, but we also have to maintain it so that it remains effective against future fires. So I'm going to look at the Fourmile Canyon fire assessment. So again, the Fourmile Canyon fire occurred in the summer of 2010, occurred in September. And what we know from the Fourmile Canyon fire is that the weather during the summer of 2010 was not abnormal. We had a relatively normal fire season, wasn't very active. We moved into the fall season, and what we had a cold front move through. That cold front came in and dropped the relative humidities to about 4%, and we had strong winds. So kind of a typical cold front that we expect every fall to come through Colorado. That fire ignited at the worst possible time. It had ignited about 10 in the morning, and it rapidly spread. So what we know about the Fourmile fire is, and this data again repeats for most of these fires that are occurring on the Front Range of Colorado, is during the first 12 hours of that fire, we lost 157 of the total 169 homes. So that fire moved very, very rapidly. During those first 12 hours, we had 474 homes exposed to fire. So if you do the math there, during that time, we also had about 200 firefighters responding to that fire. So what that means is we had 474 homes exposed and only 200 firefighters responding. Now, during that time, that doesn't tell us, it's not a reflection that our firefighters weren't well prepared. They were actually quite well prepared and were ready for this fire. What it tells us is these fires move with such speed and intensity during those first 12 hours that we need to make sure that our homes are protected from these types of fires. We need to make sure that our homes have effective mitigation around them so our homes can really defend themselves, meaning that they can survive a fire without necessarily having firefighters there to protect the home. So what we know, and what gives us, I think, really positive indications for the future, is that in this fire, we unfortunately lost 83% of these homes due to low intensity fire. Low intensity fire meaning either a surface fire, so a grass fire moving through the tall wildland grasses and coming directly in contact with a wood wall or a wood deck or a firewood pile around that home. Also, low intensity fires are embers, ember blizzards, ember showers, these hot glowing firebrands that are blowing ahead of these fires. So we lost 83% of the homes in the Fourmile fire due to little things that were easy to mitigate. And that's what I'm going to focus on today, is how to really mitigate from those little things. Now, we also did lose 17% of the homes in this fire to a crown fire, from that treetop to treetop fire, meaning that if homes were buried in the woods, completely covered in trees, those homes may have been lost due to that treetop to treetop fire moving through. So what all of this data tells us, unfortunately, is that during those first 12 hours, any homes that sustained ignition during the Fourmile fire freely burned. And this was basically due to overwhelmed firefighting capabilities. So, but what it also tells us is that we didn't have a fire-breathing dragon moving through the woods engulfing homes. What we know about wildland fire is that there's properties of combustion that have to be met for a home to burn down. So the takeaway of everything that I'm going to present here today in the next hour is that if your home does not ignite, it will not burn, which is a duh. If your home does not ignite, it will not burn. But it's very important as we move through the actions we're going to take as landowners to protect our home from fire. So looking at the more recent fire, the Waldo Canyon fire down in Colorado Springs from last summer, well, really what it tells us, and this slide probably looks pretty familiar, it tells us the same lessons learned that the Fourmile Canyon fire did and all these other fires. So proactive wildfire mitigation is effective. Embers were responsible for many ignitions around homes. A key thing out of the Waldo Canyon fire report is they found building construction details that were identified that made homes vulnerable. And I'm going to go over some of the solutions they've offered. And all of it just says that we need to maintain our defensible space. It's our responsibility, and that fuel modification has to occur within a relatively short distance from your home. So, focusing a little bit closer, the first lesson learned from Waldo. What we know is in Waldo Canyon, just like so many of these fires, is that embers are directly or indirectly igniting many of our homes. So actions to take to protect from embers, and this is what I'm going to focus on next, is proper firewood storage, proper scrap lumber storage, debris storage. Have we installed 3 to 5 feet of a non-combustible perimeter surrounding all of our structures? Have you, as a landowner, cleaned out your gutters? What do we have stored on and under our decks? So to protect from embers, and I'm going to focus a lot more on this, the needed tools are simply gloves, a ladder, a rake, and knowledge. So we will try here. Ruth, can we try to play our firebrand video? So we were having a bit of issues with videos, but we'll see if we can pull these up. What I'm going to show you guys here is what an ember blizzard looks like, or an ember storm. So these embers, again, are burning down, unfortunately, 83% of the homes in Fourmile fire, and in general, that repeats across many of these fires. When you look at images of fires that have gone through, like the recent Black Forest fire, what you often see is green forests with homes lost in between there. And the reason for that is because of these ember showers, which are literally thousands of hot glowing embers blowing through the woods and landing on things around our home. So I'm not sure, I can't see a video, but hopefully some of you can see a video. I have some people telling me no video. We'll see if this is going to work here. Fine, some people are seeing video. So those of you that are seeing video, you're seeing these thousands of hot glowing embers. Firefighters call them ember blizzards. Literally hot glowing embers. All of us have seen embers in the past when we're sitting in front of a campfire. We've seen the small embers that blow off those campfires. And so these embers are hitting our homes, and they're collecting, and they're igniting things around our homes. Generally, embers don't directly ignite our home, but they indirectly ignite other things around our home. So hopefully some of you were able to see the video there. If you weren't, just stick with us. So I'm going to click to our next slide here. So those embers, they're coming out, and they could be blowing upwards of a half mile to a mile ahead of that fire. And when they're flying in, we'll see if this works here, my little animation, they're hitting our home, and they're flowing like water, and they're collecting. So here's a little bit more of a close-up for you. So the embers are coming off the main forest fire, they're hitting our walls, and they're flowing like water. And they're collecting at the base of our walls, where our wall meets the foundation. So at that point, we need to really make sure that we evaluate, and so that make it so that there's nothing at that specific point where the wall meets the ground for those embers to ignite. So what happens, okay, so I don't think you can see that. So there I was supposed to have a little pine needles collecting in the gutter. So what happens when those embers hit our roof lines and flow like water? Well, then they collect into our gutters, and that's a major reason we want to make sure that our gutters are clean of needles. So if our gutters are completely clean, those embers will hit our roofs, flow like water, and they won't have anything to ignite once they're in the gutters. So next I'm going to try another video here, which we'll see if this one works. Hopefully for some of you, you can see this. This is an ember blizzard blowing machine that's made by IBHS, which is the Insurance Business Institute. These folks have developed this ember blizzard blowing machine down in the southeast, and they basically have a wind tunnel where they can bring in a full-scale home and they can expose this home to embers. So what you'll see if we get this video working here, which I may not be able to see it. Sounds like people can't hear me over the video, so I'm just going to let you watch the video. if you can. So you guys, it sounds like, are seeing the embers hit the walls, hit the roof lines, and flow like water. At this point, you may have already seen that the gutters have ignited. You may have already seen that the material they've placed at the base of the walls have ignited. What you can see here is that only embers are igniting the pine needles that they've stacked around this house. Okay, so it sounds like you can hear me. So we'll keep playing through here. So just keep looking at where those embers are hitting and flowing like water. So those embers are not directly igniting the home, they're igniting the things we have stored around them. So this is what we really, as landowners, need to focus on cleaning up around our home so that we don't have these embers hitting and collecting.
We need to suppress.
That video there. I wasn't able to see what was happening, otherwise I'd usually give you guys a little more of a description here. We'll pull back up here. So hopefully for those of you that are maybe watching this recorded, you'll be able to see that video and we'll be able to go through. So what that video really shows us is that we have this current research going on. So that research is by the researcher Dr. Steve Quarles in IBHS, and they're studying what the vulnerabilities are to our homes. So they're not only studying, you know, the material that we have stored on and around our decks, how these embers are igniting things in our gutter. They're also giving us research that's showing what size screening we need to have on our vents, what size screening we need to have on windows. And so a lot of research is coming out of the IBHS, and it really strongly points towards that we can retrofit our existing homes to be much more resistant against these embers coming through. So I want to keep moving forward and start giving some action items of things you can work on around your home. So one piece, as we look at this, so a lot of times we create these kind of checklists and we say, hey, if you fill out this checklist, you're going to be creating effective defensible space. But the key thing is that our checklists are never really going to be finished. So we might clean out our gutters this week, but we need to go back and check those gutters in another month to make sure that they're still cleaned. And really the point we're trying to make is that we have to make sure that our defensible space is maintained in order for it to remain effective. So as you think around your home, as you go out, go home today, or as you're looking out your windows, start thinking of your home like fuel. Start thinking of it like any other fuel out in the wildland. So where are those embers going to blow and collect around your home? Think about where leaves are already collecting around your home. Where are pine needles collecting around your home? Where does snow eddy around your house and collect? In all those same places that leaves and snow collects is going to be the same place these embers collect. And at those junctions, we really want to make sure that we have nice and clean surfaces so that there's nothing for those embers to ignite. And how I think about that a lot is if you think about when you're building a campfire, what do you start with? Well, when you're building a campfire, you always start with the kindling. You don't start building a campfire by throwing the log in first, throwing the 2x4 in first. And so on a home, a 2x4 is our siding. And in order to ignite that siding, we have to have that kindling. And often for homes here in Colorado, that kindling is the pine needles or the grass that comes right directly within the close proximity to our walls. So what all of this tells us is that we can change how fire behaves on our land. But we do need to be methodical about what we do around our homes, because unfortunately fire will find our weakest link and we'll try to capitalize on that. So what we're really trying to do here is dramatically improve our chances. Doesn't provide a guarantee. That's where other things like being properly insured, making sure that we're properly prepared for that fire by having a go kit, and so on and so forth with those preparedness pieces, which I'm not going to focus on the preparedness side quite as much in this presentation. So keep going, some pictures from the Waldo Canyon fire. So here's an example. This is the picture on our left here. Let me bring up my pointer. The picture on our left here shows this burnt firewood. I dropped a green pointer in. technical difficulties. So right here we had a firewood up against the side of this house. Embers most likely blew in and ignited this firewood, which then if we look on this side, we can see that it was actually igniting the interior of the garage, but luckily firefighter intervention came and saved this home. So in this case, simple proper storage of firewood, which I'm going to point out in a second, would be key for protecting this home from embers. So here's another example. This is a house that I was investigating. I was up in Boulder County in the foothills, and I came up and found all this firewood that was thrown out on the ground. And what we actually had was we had a garage fire up in this section here, up in the top left corner. And the house is down over here in the bottom right corner. So the garage is out in front of us, and what we had was we actually had embers come off of that garage fire, fly over and land on this firewood pile that was stored on the deck. I could tell that it wasn't a grass fire that came in because I had unconsumed vegetation between the garage and the deck. So embers flew in, landed on top of this firewood pile, ignited the firewood pile, but luckily firefighters were able to get there, put out the deck, suppress the garage fire, and the house was saved. Now, had this home been in a bigger fire like the Fourmile Canyon fire and firefighters not been here, this house would have been lost because of firewood storage on the deck. Here's another picture showing that firewood storage. And so where do we put our firewood piles? Well, ideally we'd stack those firewood piles at least 30 feet away from all buildings, and we want to see those firewood piles on the uphill or parallel to the home. So you don't want that firewood pile placed down below the home, because if it was to ignite, fire moves much more rapidly uphill, and then you run into a problem of igniting that firewood pile and putting what we call radiant heat, which is the heat we feel off of a campfire, up onto your home. So you're probably asking, well, what about during the winter? Can I keep some firewood closer to the home? And we are okay with some firewood being closer to the home, especially during the winter. Ideally, you'd still not have that stacked on decks or right up against your structure. Maybe you could look to build a firewood shed that is ember resistant, that won't allow embers into it. Or really the key piece is once the winter is ending, or if we are having a dry winter, is you really want to be conscious about where you keep this firewood. So this time of year, every home that I go to that I see a firewood pile on their deck, that's one of the first things I'm telling folks to move and place that at least 30 feet or more away from all buildings. So back to this image here, what about this fluffy cushion? Well, those embers, they're also landing on fluffy cushions and other things we have stored on and around our decks. So in this scenario, I'm not suggesting that we can't have cushions out on our deck. What I'm suggesting is that during the fire season that we're conscious about what we have stored on our deck. So for instance, if you want to have fluffy cushions out on your deck, make sure that when you leave that you bring those fluffy cushions inside, or maybe you would put a metal box out on your deck that you could store those fluffy cushions in. Because I was just down in the Black Forest fire, which is our most recent fire outside of Colorado Springs again, and I found very good pictures in places where we actually had embers that were melting little holes into the fire, into the cushions on the people's patio furniture. And so these cushions do ignite, and if those cushions are then up against a railing, then the railing ignites, then the deck ignites, and we're back to the house. And if firefighters aren't there to put out the fire, then you could lose your house because of something as simple as a cushion on your deck. So here's some other pictures. This is an example from Waldo showing just a simple firewood pile, a little scrap lumber pile stored up against the house. That pile could catch those embers, ignite the pile, and then the house is off to the races. So I'm going to show another video here. This is going to be a video.
Okay, well, which one is this? Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Room one. There we go. Sorry about that. So this one is going to show, it's a fire out in California, and you're going to, for those of you who can see it, you're going to actually see hopefully you guys are seeing this. What you see is that a firefighter is outside of the home. You see ember blizzards blowing in, and you see the firefighter come out from underneath that deck with a flaming broom. And what that's showing you is that as small as a broom, a bristle broom stored underneath your deck could be what leads to the ignition of the home. So here we're showing it again. Firefighter comes in, Luckily, they're there to if there weren't firefighters here, that flaming broom could be what leads to the ignition of your home. So simple things like a broom stored up on that deck, a dog bed stored on your deck. Think very, very small. You know, anywhere you have pine needles that have accumulated up on that deck. On and below your decks, we need to make sure are completely clean of anything flammable. So what our research shows to us is that if we have a very clean top and underside of our deck, that these embers will pose less risk to our homes. So the embers will have a hard time directly igniting just the wood decking material itself, as long as we've kept it clean and removed all that flammable material off our deck. So the next lesson that I'm going to focus on here from the Waldo Canyon fire is building materials and specifically design details. So my quote here, a building can be hardened with non-combustible materials, but it is also important to consider construction details. So here I'm going to focus the next couple of slides on watching out for where our siding has low ground clearance. And I'm also going to talk about complex roof lines. A piece I'm not going to talk about as much, but retrofitting your home, if you or maybe a neighbor, if you're looking outside and you have a shake shingle roof, I'm going to suggest that's the most important thing you change on your roof or on your home. So shake shingle roofs obviously collect those embers and lead to pretty much the almost guaranteed loss of a home. So replacing shake shingle roofs is very important. And then the other piece with retrofitting is replacing wood whenever possible. And I'll kind of talk on more of these pieces as we go through here. Oh, it's too far. Let me click back here. Okay. So this slide here, what the Waldo Canyon fire identified, so this home that we're looking at here actually has what we call cement fiberboard siding, meaning that it has ignition resistant siding on the outside. Now, unfortunately, this landowner has gone in and has installed mulch back in right underneath this siding. And what they found in Waldo, if you look at my picture on the left side here, is that you can actually see right in here where the OSB, the plywood, is exposed behind the cement fiber siding, meaning that this material that we see here, if this mulch was to ignite by either embers landing in here or grass fire coming into here, is this would smolder and smoke, run fire back to the underside there, and directly ignite our material that we have backing behind here. So in this scenario, what would be really good is if this homeowner had 3 to 5 feet of completely clear material outside of here so that this vulnerability underneath our ignition resistant siding wasn't exposed. I'll show a couple more slides here. So you can kind of check on your own home if you have cement fiber siding, if you have stucco siding, if you have rock siding, you can look and make sure that you don't have that gap exposed. Now, how you can solve this issue here too would be to install a little piece of metal flashing. They actually sell flashing that would have little perforated holes to let water drain out of there, but you can install basically a 1-inch piece of metal flashing that would cover that exposed plywood, which is the flammable piece of wood behind here. So we also have, they did a study on various mulches, from rubber mulch to bark mulch to pine needle mulch, and they showed, you know, how these materials burn and what the comparison is. You know, does this one burn more? Does this one burn less? Basically what it came away with is all mulches burn, whether it be rubber mulch, bark mulch, pine needle mulch. They burn a little bit differently, but the takeaway was they all burn. And so right outside of your home, we need to really make sure that we don't have mulch stacked to right up next to that foundation because of these embers, again, hitting our walls, flowing like water, and collecting. And if they're collecting on that mulch that we've placed below the walls, that's where we worry about that indirect ignition of embers igniting your mulch, then igniting your walls. So another lesson, so this home here, what we're looking at and showing is that we have a couple of different homes. What we'd like to see is the last piece of your siding ideally should have at least 6 inches of clearing where the cement foundation is exposed on your home. So in this case here, we have our picture on the right, which shows a nice rock perimeter around the home, but you can see that that siding is very, very low. So in this scenario, embers could hit that wall, flow like water, and collect right on those rocks. And if they're collecting and there's not a gap there, then the embers could directly ignite that wood siding. So in this scenario, we may suggest that this landowner actually remove that bottom piece of siding and expose the cement foundation that would be below there. Here's another picture from Waldo showing where this home has a bumped out window and they've got mulch stacked all underneath here. So in this scenario, again, embers ignite that mulch and then ignite the complex kind of angles that are on the edge here, my bottom right picture. And again here, what we'd like to see installed instead would be a 3 to 5 feet non-combustible perimeter surrounding this structure. Here's a home in the Fourmile Canyon fire that these folks got lucky that they had ignition resistant siding outside their home. So this was all mulch, kind of guerrilla mulch that was in here. The fire burned through all of this, and you can see that it was really scorching the side of this rock. Had this been a wood-sided house, this home would have been lost because of that mulch burning and exposing and burning into the home there. And here's another picture showing the stucco where it burned up and consumed that mulch. And you can see all that mulch farther out in the picture there. So ideally outside of all our homes, and this is a really important feature to have outside of our homes, is making sure that we have 3 to 5 feet of non-combustible vegetation. So outside of here, I'm going to show some pictures of what we can do. So here's an example of some nice crushed gravel, a flagstone patio that they're putting in. And what ideally I'd like to see outside of all our homes is I want to see smooth surfaces. So crushed gravel is going to be your cheapest option. Now you're going to have to make sure to maintain this. So you want to use a type of crushed gravel that you can still get a leaf rake on top of so that you can clean out any pine needles that might accumulate on here. So I like smooth surfaces like flagstone. I actually like poured concrete as an option so that we can just get a broom on top of here. And then also incorporated in some of our paths, our driveways, our landscape design, which I'm going to show you in a few slides here. So here's another couple of examples, still with that simple crushed gravel, the cheapest option you're going to have. You can do, kind of more curved patterns to make it more attractive outside. And again, this is making it so those embers hit your walls, flow like water, and now they're accumulating on an ignition-resistant surface, that crushed gravel. Here's a nice example underneath a deck of what we'd want to see. Nothing flammable underneath this deck, crushed gravel coming out 2 to 3 feet past the outer edge of this deck. Here's another example. This is crushed gravel with a flagstone patio kind of put into it. Now in this scenario, what I did want to show, and also here, so 3 to 5 feet of ignition resistant, that's a bare minimum. Think big, the more ignition resistant that you have, the safer you're going to be from fires approaching. So in this scenario, they have probably 10 feet going out of crushed gravel in that patio. However, here, my arrow I point out here, and I'm going to zoom in on this point, is they've had pine needles accumulating on top of their crushed gravel. So this is where those embers could fly in, bypass the nice ignition resistant crushed gravel, ignite those pine needles, and then ignite that section of wood siding. So, but right here, it's very easy to maintain. Get a rake in there, get some gloves, pull that material out, and make sure that it's very clean so those embers are landing on a truly ignition resistant surface. So here's a nice example of how we can use a walkway as a surface outside of our home. So thinking about how you can use paths or driveways is going to be a very important thing. Here's some pavers. You can use various kinds of pavers, make designs and patterns outside the home. So we can make this look very attractive. For those of you who may not like the look of crushed gravel outside the home, think about pavers, think about these pathways we can create. Here's a little bit more fancy, kind of different colors of crushed gravel with a nice border, an irrigated lawn. Here's an example of a home that had a pathway running right next to the house before those first plantings. And you can see that the fire burned right up to nearly to that path, and it was a nice strategically placed path that would run around this home. Another example of kind of a patio with a retaining wall used to create that ignition resistant surface outside. Here's another one with the one challenge with flagstones is you will get weeds kind of growing up between them. So we would need to make sure that we maintain those weeds and keep that surface clean. Here's a nice home. I really like this example of a nice flagstone patio, and they've actually made a slate step as their first step. They also have metal furniture, which I like for outside the home here. However, looking in that corner right there, what we can actually see is they've got a pile of pine needles that have eddied around and accumulated right there over the winter. And then again here, if embers landed on that pile, that would ignite the pine needle pile, which then could ignite that first section of siding you see exposed there. Another example of a patio outside of a home here. Some steps going up. So really thinking about how we can incorporate this into our landscape design, which for our next webinar, we're going to be talking a lot more on what plants you can choose to put in here. Here's a really nice example, a poured concrete slab outside of this home. Outside underneath the same home here, we've got a nice crushed or a nice rock kind of area, making sure that this landowner keeps any pine needles out of this area, but this is a very nice looking underside of a deck. Here's the backside of a really nice patio installed, nice features, and then you can also see that they've got a irrigated lawn outside of there where they've kept the lawn nice and low. More pictures of just kind of patio designs, things you can think about outside of your house. Getting a little bit more fancy, kind of a rock garden area with some nice interspersed plantings. This is a really nice ignition resistant outside patio for this home. This is more kind of rocks pressed into concrete, so we can get really fancy with what we're working on outside our homes. And even fancier outside the home. So if you're looking outside and you're going, well, Ryan, I don't have rock installed yet, so do I have other options? Another option would be, if you don't have rock now, what I would suggest is within that first 3 to 5 feet of your home is that you just rake down to bare mineral soil. Rake down so that it's very clean outside of your house, cut the grass down, and bare mineral soil, for the most part here in Colorado, is decomposed granite. And that decomposed granite will act exactly the same as having a crushed rock gravel installed or a flagstone patio installed outside of your home. So this is what I, for instance, have outside my home right now. I just go around, run around the house, and make sure that I rake all pine needles and leaves away from the first 3 to 5 feet of your home. Another example, nice and clean out from underneath here. In this scenario, I'd probably like them to cut that grass down a little bit more so it's not quite as close to the deck. So continuing to think about how we maintain the outside. So here's some areas where this landowner would simply need to get out a rake and some gloves to kind of clean out these areas. So right along the foundation on my right picture, you can see that they can just take a rake and rake all that material away. Then they have bare mineral soil exposed. They've got a little bit of that concrete exposed there. And so those embers would then hit that picture on the right, flow like water, and they would collect, and they wouldn't be able to ignite anything flammable along there. My picture on the left is right next to a deck there, and it just shows where we have decades of leaf collection. And this one's a little trickier because of those big rocks in there, but getting some gloves out, maybe a leaf blower, and blowing that material out of there so it's nice and clean and there's nothing flammable. Another picture next to a deck. Again, maybe a leaf blower in this scenario to get all that material out of there. You can just see how embers would directly ignite that and then ignite the Trex decking on this home. So there's a picture of those actual embers during a fire. So you can see that how big those embers can be. That's what the embers look like, and they're landing on and igniting these piles. Some more pictures just outside where a rake, moving that bucket away from that beam there, but raking this material away so we have a nice clean surface outside this home. Be especially careful where your stairs come down to the ground. This picture here shows stairs coming down, and you can see all the material that's collected next to these stairs. Where your stairs come to the ground, oftentimes I'll go to homes, and the first place I check is I reach right around behind your stairs and check for decades of pine needles that have accumulated in there. So make sure that it's nice and clean. If you can, it'd be ideal to have your stairs come down to some sort of ignition resistant surface. Here's a nice example of a flagstone patio. And here's a picture from Texas wildfire that actually shows the stairs being the weak link in running fire to this home. Uh-oh, that picture didn't come through here. So The other piece is thinking about that propane tank. Propane tanks are really a little bit more for firefighter safety. If firefighters come to your home and your propane tank is buried in trees, is covered in firewood, is perhaps fenced in, those firefighters may just turn around and go to protect the next home. So ideally, out on all of our propane tanks, I want you to have 5 feet of rock installed around your tank. I want you to remove all your trees within 10 feet of this tank and make sure that we don't have any branches overhanging the tank.
Hey, Ryan, hopefully you're back. I had the same
Oh,
problem.
sorry about that, folks. Can people hear me? Ruth, am I back
Yep.
on here? Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
Sorry about that, folks. We're working from a slow internet connection up in the mountains of Gilpin County here, so just trying to keep moving forward here. So sorry about that slight break there, but so propane tanks is what we were talking about there. So the other piece is I see a lot of folks try to screen propane tanks. They may, in this picture, try to build a fence around their propane tank so they don't see it. I've seen people stack firewood piles around their propane tanks, but really we need to make sure that these propane tanks are completely clean. So don't store any flammable material around them. The other piece is ideally your propane tank will be located at least 25 feet or more from your buildings. And again, on a propane tank, you'd like to have that tank, if you're going to move it, try to put it at the same elevation as your house. So you don't want the tank either above your house, because if it's above your home on a slope, if the propane leaks, it is heavier than air and it may accumulate in a crawl space or a basement. You also don't want the propane tank below the house, because if it was to ignite and explode, it's then going to be funneling fire uphill towards your home. Yes, and there was a question, is it okay to have propane tanks above the house if it's 100+ feet away? And I would say yes, that's probably going to be fine. The main worry would be if that propane tank was to leak or anything like that. But I think 100 feet you should be fine. Buried? Nope. We don't. The question was if it's a buried tank, which I think is my next one here. If you have a buried tank, you don't need to worry about having that 5 feet of rock installed around it. Although I would probably still cut the grass down around and make sure that where that connection is that you don't have any material that would potentially ignite the connections of a buried tank. Buried tanks are going to be the best. If you own your tank, you could look to bury it, but it is more of expensive to bury them. Now, the nice thing with propane tanks is they are actually relatively difficult to blow up. So if you have that 5 feet of crushed gravel around it, you've removed the trees off of it, and you don't have anything stored around it, you should be just fine for your propane tank. So continuing to think about actions around the home. So gutters, I think I've kind of talked on this, but we need to make sure we're cleaning out these gutters. Good picture of before and after. Just picture how those embers could flow like water down that roof line on the left and collect in that gutter, where if it's completely clean, they're going to land in your gutters and there's not going to be a real worry of them igniting things. And as you're thinking about gutters on your home, metal gutters are going to be the best option, with vinyl gutters being a slightly worse option, just because the vinyl can have a tendency to melt and then fall off the house. So making sure that we clean debris off of our roofs is going to be another important piece. I am getting a little behind, so I'm going to keep bumping through here. So next I'm going to show a video from a fire down in the Los Alamos area. So this video, what it's going to really show to you, and is that I want you to look at and notice how as you're looking at these homes, you're seeing this aerial view from a helicopter. And what you're seeing is there's not a fire-breathing dragon in this forest. You're seeing that the main fire has already passed through the community or is out in the wildland area. What you see is that little things around these homes are igniting. So you can see on some homes that you actually have firewood piles right next to the foundation that's igniting. You can see on other homes that we actually have gutters that are igniting from embers landing on those roofs and getting into those gutters. So all in this video, showing you actual live video from the Los Alamos fire, it's showing you it's the small things that are igniting around these homes. And this is where if we don't have enough firefighters to respond, the little things are burning down our homes. Hopefully you guys were able to see that. As far as turning off, there was a question for propane tanks. Should we turn off the propane tank if a fire is threatening? And yes, you should. Before you evacuate, you would want to turn off the valve to the propane tank, if you have time. So another piece I'm just going to show you here, another lesson learned, building design, is thinking about your roof. And if you have a complex roof line, meaning that you have a lot of kind of nooks and crannies and places where pine needles collect, potentially places where embers collect. So in this picture here, what I am showing you is that basically we have pine needles collecting in this area where my green pointer is, and then a potential for those needles to collect, bypass our Class A assembly roof. So the roof on this home is very fire resistant, but here the siding that it's now igniting on the side may not be. And so we might have pine needles ignite and then ignite the section of our roof here. Okay, so here's some other examples just where we need to make sure we have metal flashing installed around our chimney. Again, if we have any pine needles that collect around that chimney, then those embers flow like water and collect. All we need to have is a simple piece of about 4-inch metal flashing, which most of our chimneys should have, but it's something to just check and make sure that our chimney has flashing around it. Flashing can also be used on our decks. So if you have wood walls and a wood deck, you can actually go in and install this piece of metal flashing, my picture on the left here, and have about 4 inches of metal flashing go up on your house. Try to tuck that metal flashing underneath your first piece of siding, or put a bead of caulking there so you don't get water behind it. Then you can see that this metal flashing actually comes out about 4 inches as well. So you could look to put that onto wood decks, where you would basically create this L-shaped metal piece of flashing that would then make it so when embers hit your walls, flow like water, they're now collecting on that metal flashing instead of right on your wood decks. So anywhere you have rotten wood on a home is going to be somewhere that embers would be more likely to ignite. So it may be a window sill like what we have in this picture here, could be a rotten deck, and it could be a good reason to look to replace your deck. So if you have a deck that's really old and rotten, definitely choosing a decking material that would be more like a composite decking, a Trex type decking. Those plastic deckings are going to hold up better than wood. But really with any of our decks, unless it's a truly ignition resistant deck like stone or metal, any of our decks, so if it's wood or Trex type decking, making sure that we have it completely clean, both on top of and below the deck, will really help to protect it from indirect ignition from embers. So fences, if you have a fence at your property, this was another big one from Waldo. They had lots of fences. Anywhere that your fence runs out to, if it comes back and directly connects to the edge of your house, these fences are acting like fuses. And so if this fire was to ignite out here somewhere on the fence, it then just runs simply back to the house and ignites your home. So, but simple solution. All that in that scenario is making sure that the last section of your fence is a metal gate of some type, is non-combustible. Could be a stucco wall that you put in at that last section to make it so you don't have a fuse running out, meaning if your fence ignites anywhere along the line. So vents are another big one. So those embers, they are unfortunately also getting sucked inside of our vent openings. So vents, we need to make sure that all of our crawl space vents, our attic vents, our soffit vents, the soffits are on the underside of your roof lines most of the time. We want to make sure that we have an 1/8 inch metal screening on these vents. That 1/8 inch metal screening that ideally is a non-corrosive metal screening will help to keep embers out of your vents. Because the vents, like this gable vent that I have on the right here, this one here, that gable vent will actually suck those embers right into the house. But if you have that screening, it'll block most of those embers from going inside. So plant placement, keep moving along here. Where we place our plants is going to be another really important piece. So ideally, plants aren't going to be placed underneath windows. Ideally, I don't want to see really any flammable vegetation in that first 3 to 5 feet. But if you do put vegetation in there, like some small interspersed wildflowers, maybe some really small deciduous shrubs with leaves on them, want to make sure that those aren't underneath windows. Those aren't near house vents. We don't want any plants around or near our decks or porches. And really, ideally, like I said, outside of those walls, I'd like to have that area as a non-flammable perimeter. And I'd like to think about where we put our plantings as 5 feet out from those walls. So here's a picture of where we had plantings too close to this home. The plantings ignited in this scenario. And what you can actually see in this picture is the 2 panes of glass on this window broke. And this landowner got very lucky that fire didn't get inside the house. So in here, those shrubs should have been placed about 5 feet out from that window, and we would have been able to protect from breaking the windows on this home. My arrow a little late. Another example here showing embers blew over this nice path that's outside the home, started igniting this deciduous bush here, and luckily it didn't ignite too much and it doesn't appear to have broken the window panes on this glass. But a good reason not to have any flammable plantings underneath these windows. So far I've talked about, just to recap where we're at, and I'm going to move in and talk on trees real quick here at the end. But what we're really talking about here in my main points is that we need to make sure to protect our home from these embers. Embers, aka glowing firebrands, these are directly or indirectly igniting a vast majority of the homes that are lost in fires. Also, the low intensity grass fire. So thinking about making sure that we cut our grass outside of our home. And ideally, and I've got some slides here in a second, we want to make sure that all wildland grass is cut to a max height of 6 inches within 30 feet of our home. And the other piece that I'm going to just talk about for the last section here is going to be making sure to protect our home from radiant heat. Radiant heat, again, being the heat you feel off that campfire, making sure that we've got our trees farther enough away from our home so we don't have intense radiant heat pushing at our home. I'll skip through some of this. So I'm going to switch in and move from maintaining your defensible space to really thinking about how do we create defensible space outside of our home. So I'm going to skip over a little bit of stuff here and just hit the kind of the key points. I think for a lot of folks, you've heard the tree thinning and spacing a lot, and I don't think that folks have quite heard as much on the maintenance and what embers and low intensity grass fires are doing to our homes. So defensible space, again, is where we're going to do tree modification to make sure that that radiant heat, the crown fire, the treetop to treetop fire, doesn't have enough heat intensity to directly ignite our home. So generally your zone 1, which on my picture here is shown drawn out to about 30 feet from the outside edges of this home, and then our zone 2 usually goes out to about 100 feet on flat ground, or if you're on a steep slope, it could go out to 150 to even 200 feet. So zone 1, within 30 feet of all of our structures. Ideally in this zone 1, so measured from the outer edge of your eaves to 30 feet out, is ideally we're going to have no conifers, no trees with needles, or shrubs in zone 1. In zone 1, I want you to encourage aspens. I want to see a lot of aspens in this area. Maybe you could have interspersed shrubs that have leaves on them, but the key thing in zone 1 for shrubs that I don't want to see is the flammable junipers that we often like to plant that kind of provide screening, and anything with needles. So plants with needles have flammable oils in them that make them more susceptible to fire. Firefighters call juniper bushes, for instance, they call them Roman candles. They call them matchsticks, and they're highly flammable. So in zone 1, that's where I want the most aggressive fuel modification. Ideally few, if any, conifers. Aspens are okay. If you do end up having that one prize tree that you're saying, no way, I'm not going to remove this tree, I built my house around this tree, I want you to make sure that you isolate that tree. Keep it so that no other trees are within about 30 feet or more of that tree. So I want that tree to now really become part of your structure. I want you to prune that tree up so that there's at least 10 feet from the lower branches of that tree to the ground. And I want you to remove all ladder fuels under that tree. You could even go in and install rock underneath this tree. But really, for the most part, I think if we can really look to remove all of those conifers in that first 30 feet, that's going to be crucial for helping reduce the amount of radiant heat you'll have pushing towards that home. So zone 1, again, I had mentioned cutting your grass. If you haven't cut your grass already at this time during the summer, grab that weed whip, get out there and cut all grass within 30 feet of your house. Keep it so it's a max height of 6 inches. I want it shorter as you get closer to the house, and maybe it could be a little longer as you move farther away. You could also go out for added protection. You could mow 15 feet or so around your roads and your driveways. And you could even go out for some of those really prized, maybe ponderosa pine you have that are in your zone 2, so 30 feet or more out from your home. You could actually cut the grass out from underneath those prized trees as well. So zone 1, just some nice examples of good zone 1s, having those 30 feet pushed away, the trees not within 30 feet of the home. This really helps to make it so that we don't have too much of that radiant heat, the heat you can feel off the campfire pushing at the home. If trees are closer than that 30 feet, if they do ignite, they have a much easier time breaking windows or directly igniting decks on a home. Nice examples of zone 1. We've already seen these ones. So ladder fuels in zone 1. Ladder fuels are any fuel that can funnel fire from the ground into treetops. So ladder fuels can both be shrubs. They can also be small lower branches on a tree. So ideally, we'd like to remove all ladder fuels from zone 1, and that includes ground junipers. So ground junipers that you find underneath prized trees, you would want to pull those out of your zone 1. And for ladder fuel removal, you can use a lot of tools, just a pruning shear or a small handsaw to do a lot of your zone 1, your ladder fuel removal. So zone 2, I'm just going to jump into and just go over real quick here, and we're almost out of time here, but keep going through. So in zone 2, what I want you to do is try to make clumps of trees. I'd ideally like you to have clumps, or what I also call islands of trees. So you have maybe 2 to 3 trees that are close to each other, and then I want to see gaps between those trees. Ideally gaps of upwards of 20 to 30 feet. And the idea here in zone 2, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take an approaching fire out of the treetops and have it approach your home as a grass fire. So I'm gonna keep jumping ahead and show you a couple of pictures. So yeah, drop the fire out of the treetops, reduce that radiant heat as it's approaching your home, and it's going to really diminish the fire intensity as it comes up to your home. So this also creates an area where firefighters have a chance to protect your home. So low limbing, again, how we measure that, 6 to 10 feet. I want you to remove all lower limbs on trees within about that, really zone 1 and zone 2. And I'm measuring from the ground to where those branches reach down to, not the ground to the trunk of the tree. So 6 to 10 feet of low limbing for all those trees. And also keep in mind with low limbing, you never want to remove more than about a third of the tree's height. I'm going to run out of time here, folks. So I'm going to keep going through. So here's a nice example of a zone 2. That's a nice clump of trees. This homeowner probably has a few too many trees right in its zone 1, but that'd be a nice example of a clump of 2 to 3 trees. Another nice example of a clump of 3 trees with a nice wide 20 to 30 foot spacing. In this scenario here, I'm not quite seeing the clumping I'd like to see. So if this homeowner went in and removed those 2 trees, they'd get much more of that clumping that I want to see, making it so that our fires can drop out of the treetops and approach our home as a lower intensity surface fire. The other piece is in ponderosa pine. By making this clumping, you're actually matching the natural ecology of how these forests wanted to grow anyways. So another example where we could take out this tree, that's a split top tree, would be one we may want to take out, and then we start getting more of those clumps. So lodgepole pine management is going to be a little bit tougher, but again, ideally in zone 1, we would have few, if any, conifers. What I really want you to think about in lodgepole pine is making sure that we encourage aspen. Lodgepole are a very weak rooted tree species, meaning if you try to clump them and you cut your lodgepole pine so that you have clumps of 3 to 5, you're probably going to see those clumps blow over in the wind. So if you live in Lodgepole, what I'd recommend is calling someone like myself at the county or someone in your local Colorado State Forest Service or CSU Extension's office to really help you with management in Lodgepole, because it's a little bit of a more difficult ecosystem to work in. So then your zone 3, that's going to be the rest of your forest. Zone 3 will go from the edge of zone 2, which is roughly 100 feet to maybe 150 to 200 feet, out to the edge of your forest. Out here is where we're just being good stewards of our land. We're going to be doing forest health improvement. If you live in lower elevation, maybe ponderosa pine restoration, you could be doing aspen enhancement. And in lodgepole pine or our mixed conifer forest, we'd be looking at doing patch cutting. But really all of this and what we're talking about for our zones of defensible space is making sure that we thin our forest, drop the intensity of that fire as it approaches our home. And what's, I think, exciting about this thinning is that we really can match the ecology of our local Front Range ecosystem and make it so that we have both a healthier forest after we've done this zones of defensible space, and we're also going to make our home protected from fire. On top of that, with a lot of this thinning work, we actually make our forest less susceptible to bark beetles as well. So just a couple more quick slides. So here's some examples. Stick with me if people are looking at leaving. Just these are pretty cool. So this is Fourmile Canyon. You can see in where the fire started at that star. And this homeowner did a tremendous amount of defensible space work beforehand. So look at how the fire came up, hit where his defensible space was done right here. These are his property lines. He literally made the fire V around him and helped protect both his home and the homes behind him. Keep showing you another picture here. Here's an overview. Fire coming up from the bottom right, hits his zones of defensible space. So he both has trees left after this fire and a home, and you can see the neighborhood that he protected behind him. Another just kind of picture showing just the dramatic difference of the work he made. And this is what the fire looked like when it passed his home. Some other examples, high intensity fire, but zones of defensible space were in place. Here's a home that likely that break down below the house, and likely building materials helped save this home. There's that one was an example of defensible space work. So I think I'm gonna just click through the last of these. We do have log and slash disposal sites in Gilpin and Boulder County, but we're just about out of time here. So I'm just gonna. So there was a question, do I need to low limb my windbreak trees? They're within zone 2. So I think that question is going to be kind of site specific, Caroline. So what I would recommend is that you do call someone with your either State Forest Service, CSU Extensions, or county and kind of describe more, because it'll kind of depend on where that is and if it's uphill or downhill from your house. So I'm just going to get through, I think